The Lucifer Effect: How Good People Turn into the Devils of Hell. Author Philip Zimbardo. Subtitles by freebooksummary. Introduction. The Lucifer Effect summarizes years of work, the starting point of which was the Stanford Prison Experiment 1971. This lasted only 6 days and involved just over 24 people. The wardens were so eager to torture the prisoners, and the prisoners were so stressed that the experiment had to be terminated early. But even today, if you type experiment or prison into Google, the Stanford Prison Experiment is among the first links to remind society of the things it least wanted to think about. Human behavior is determined not only by inclinations, but to a large extent by the situation, and the situation depends on the system. We can have it too. Any individual and any society is at risk. Already Hannah Arendt spoke on the banality of evil, has sounded the world out. Milgram has already conducted a shocking experiment and verified that the executor, obeying authority, is ready to torture a man to death. The media had already been disturbed by the observers' mishap. Witnesses to the murder did not try to intervene. And following Zimbardo's experience, several risky school experiments showed how quickly people are divided into us and them, how others are dehumanized and all prohibitions are abolished. Totalitarianism, purges, genocide, group ethics and lack of social responsibility, bullying the defenseless. All this is not about them but about us, about everyone. The theme of the banality of evil fits into the context of an era that is trying to comprehend the origins of systemic violence. Even if its initiators are some kind of freaks, where do the perpetrators come from? CT gives a terrible answer: they are ordinary people in a total situation. It is necessary to look at the situation that contributes to this transformation. It can be not only power or prison, but also other factors, especially effective in teenage companies, in closed groups where initiation takes place, in any division into us and them. There is a system behind the situation: the state, power, ideology, upbringing, social structure, and concepts. They are what ultimately ensure the banality of evil and the obedience of its perpetrators. This book forces everyone, including the author, to take a hard look at themselves. This book is a judgment on the system. Several chapters are devoted to examining the culpability of the administration, beginning with the president and the War Department in the Abu Ghraib prisoner massacres. Other chapters cite sad examples, both old and new: the Japanese intervention in China, the Americans in Vietnam, the Rwandan genocide. The book presents human history and arrogant modernity in a grim light, but judging harshly human nature, history, and modern systems. Philip Zimbardo concludes his book with hope: the banality of evil can be countered by banal heroism, without being seduced by the belief that anyone but me can be bad, without being seduced by systems and authorities, without looking at any situation with a keen eye, always maintaining personal responsibility, observing the 10 commandments of banal heroism. Everyone can save himself, turn the situation around, start a fight against the system, and a small rebellion. There are enough examples of this in history, will not remain in vain. Moreover, it is the only effective way. Conformism is destructive. It is conformism, not sadism or passion for power, that has turned out to be the main source of evil. In order not to become a fallen angel, one must remain oneself and not be indifferent. 1. The Stanford Prison Experiment: a performer's mishap. Roles in CT were allocated by lot, but from day one, wardens invented cruel and humiliating punishments, and prisoners rapidly developed symptoms of learned helplessness. Outside observers and even loved ones did not intervene. Zimbardo himself did not stop the experiment in time. He emphasizes sadistic tendencies were discovered in only one probationer. Initially, they were so weak that the tests did not detect them. Several other wardens were driven to cruelty not by sadism, but by a desire to overcome insecurity. The remaining wardens, who did not approve of cruelty at all and took no pleasure in it, also participated in the punishments. The role proved more important than the individual. The victims also accepted their role and almost lost their own personality. The interests of the experimenter took precedence over humanity and professionalism. Outside observers trusted authority and took everything for granted. The situation was a much more important factor than inclinations. It gave an opportunity to manifest weak and hidden bad inclinations and, much more importantly, drowned out the good ones. It was as if people stopped being themselves. Without checking with common sense and conscience, they obediently accepted the rules of the game, trusted the authorities, followed the group example, that is, they were good performers, honest subordinates. It was about the performer's mishap that Hannah Arendt wrote in The Banality of Evil, about Eichmann, good family man, good friend, scrupulously decent, the organizer of the mass extermination of the Jews. Eichmann repeated what judges have heard repeatedly since 1945 from high-ranking and minor participants. In the genocide, I was just following orders. Everybody did it. I trusted the authorities. I tried for the good of my people. Milgram's shocking experiment a few years before CT confirmed the extreme danger of conformity. All other factors that might have influenced the Nazis, self-interest and desire for promotion, indoctrination, hatred of Jews, wartime tensions, were eliminated from the experiment. The participants, ordinary Americans, were instructed to experience the role of punishment in learning electrocuting a misbehaving student for wrong answers. At one point, looking at the student's suffering, the participants tried to stop the experiment, but the supervisor easily persuaded them to continue. It must be done. You must. It's for the sake of science. The experiment must be brought to an end. And 2/3 of the subjects, and to the maximum, that is, administered what they thought was a life-threatening shock. By obeying authority, they could kill a person. In the same years, the experiment was put to life. A maniac called Diners claimed to be from the police and demanded to undress, search, interrogate the employee, allegedly guilty of theft, and describe the process to him in detail. In more than 90% of the cases, the diner employees both undressed and inspected the girl's most intimate parts and proceeded to humiliate her, obeying the authority of the voice on the phone and the magical words from the police. Examining CT against the background of other experiments and real-life cases, Zimbardo concluded that the situation is often stronger than the individual, and this is not out of selfishness and a propensity for violence, but out of conformity, that is, a desire to be like everyone else, to be good, and to obey authority. Chapter 2. Those Dirty Pigs. The Power of Group Consciousness. Extremely quickly the wardens began to perceive the prisoners as a unified and dangerous group. They later explained their behavior by saying that they expected any mischief from them and considered it their duty to prevent escapes and riots. Measures of intimidation and humiliation were used preventively. When people were stripped naked, called by numbers, and not allowed to watch, they turned into dirty pigs. The division into our own and strangers is an evolutionary mechanism. But in humans, the animal need for safety is joined by social needs, the same conformism, and the desire to take their place in the hierarchy. By opposing himself to others, a person both strengthens himself in the group and raises his status at the expense of outsiders. On the one hand, collective responsibility is not as heavy. On the other hand, punishing a dirty pig does not seem to violate the golden rule. In Milgram's experience, two factors significantly increase the willingness to strike the maximum blow if the decision was made as a group, not individually. If someone spoke ill of the student who was to be electrocuted beforehand, on the contrary, sole responsibility and favorable feedback about the pupil supposedly accidental, not at all a prescription, encouraged to stop the cruel experience. So, in addition to conformism, the order, the dehumanization of the other plays its role. This technique is used not only in times of war, but also to pit one part of society against another. The enemy is portrayed as a vile, dangerous animal, a rat, a cockroach, a pig. The usual prohibition to kill does not apply to dirty pigs. State terror or genocide is prepared through such measures. The division is occurring rapidly. At the outbreak of World War I, everyone seemed to be mad with hatred, contemporaries recalled. In the experiment, the dehumanization of those who yesterday were their own is equally rapid. Hawaiian students were told that the mentally retarded were a burden on society. 91% of the young people suggested destroying the idiots, and 29% were willing to sacrifice their relatives as well. Dehumanization of strangers goes hand in hand with dissolution into the group. The division between one's own and another's is not personal, but group-based. It can happen for the most insignificant reasons. An American elementary school teacher conducted an experiment. She told the children that blue-eyed people were better than brown-eyed people. This was enough to cause division and hostility. Along with the dehumanization of the stranger, people show a dangerous tendency to idealize their own and blend in with the group. to dehumanization of the enemy is coupled with a loss of personal responsibility and identity. As such, to explain to his students where fascists come from, Ron Jones told them that the best would be recruited into his fictional third wave movement with slogans like strength, in discipline, in 2 or 3 weeks. The very guys who had resented fascism and said that we can't do it here were ready to march and kill in the name of an idea that, in fact, neither existed nor was needed. The very unity of their ranks, their chosenness, and the threat of the alien were the idea. Chapter 3. Black Glasses: The Anonymous Nature of Evil. In the debriefing after CT, the wardens claimed that the black glasses that came with the uniform made their job easier. With the glasses on, they stopped being themselves, got rid of compassion. To test this claim, Zimbardo modified Milgram's shock experiment. Anonymity became the variable. Participants with their faces covered used twice as much cruel punishment as women whose faces were open and whose names were labeled. Their cruelty did not depend on hearing good or bad comments about the students before the experiment. Although this was important for the open-faced participants, anonymity deprives both executioner and victim of individuality. Deindividualization can also occur under the influence of drugs, alcohol, stress. The mechanism is the same. A person without a personality is not quite a person. Personal responsibility disappears, as well as the thought of the past and the future. A person completely dissolves into the present, his needs, fears and pleasures. This happens in war, at a carnival, at a party. Often such dissolution has the harmless character of a celebration, of strengthening group identity. But when combined with the dehumanization of the enemy and the social sanction for violence, deindividualization leads to violent reprisals. Deindividualization occurs not only in the strong group, but also among the victims. What was striking in CT was the behavior not only of the wardens, but also of the prisoners who failed to assert their dignity, who quickly fell into learned helplessness. If one of the prisoners rebelled, the others did not support him, showed no sympathy for the punished person. No one was interested in the cellmate's past or future prospects. The phenomenon of falling out of time, observed both among the warders and prisoners, is an acute symptom of deindividuation. The individual loses touch with memory, that is, with himself, and with the future, that is, with responsibility. He reacts only to the challenges of the moment, almost like an animal, performing the function assigned to him: warden, prisoner, teacher, group member, and perceiving neither himself nor others as individuals. A person becomes completely dependent on the total situation. Subsequently, he may ask with horror how I could act in such a way, tolerate such treatment, or look at it indifferently. But most likely, he will hide behind group responsibility, did as everyone else did, followed instructions, thought it was necessary, thought the bosses knew better. Accepting the situation on faith is a problem not only for executioners and victims, but also for outside observers, and ultimately for society as a whole. The expression "fear the indifferent" is well known, but indifference is no more an innate tendency and sadism. Indifference is also a product of the situation and the system. Vigilance, the ability to analyze the situation, and altruism opposing deindividualization and dehumanization must be nurtured and supported by the whole society. Chapter 4. Education of Altruism: The Observer Effect. The Observer Effect came to the attention of psychologists in 1960 in connection with the case of Kitty Genovese. A young woman was murdered in front of nearly 40 witnesses. Soon another girl was raped in broad daylight, and again, no one reacted. The main reason social psychology called the anonymity of the inhabitant of the metropolis. In a crowd, everyone mentally shifts responsibility to another, and the bigger the crowd, the less personal responsibility. The difference in the behavior of residents of a big city and a prosperous university town. Zimbardo tested a few months before the CT. Leaving in New York and Palo Alto derelict car. In New York, it was blown to bits in 3 days. Cameras showed that it was wielded by people of quite prosperous appearance. In Palo Alto, not only was the car untouched, but when it was removed from the street after the experiment, vigilant neighbors reported it stolen. The unfavorable environment of New York City also contributed to vandalism. This experiment was a practical confirmation of the broken windows theory. Lack of order increases crime. That the observer effect can also manifest itself in a favorable environment. In people of the most noble profession, being good is too often understood as conformity to a social role or loyalty to a group. Good policemen shun corruption, but do not expose their colleagues. Good cardinals cover up pitiful priests. A good preacher rushes a good Samaritan sermon past a person in need of help. 90% of Princeton seminarians did so. During the CT, the doctor and priest who had been to the prison approved the continuation of the experiment. The priest's wife sympathetically gave the prisoners tea and urged them to be patient. Zimbardo convinced the parents of the young man who had had a nervous breakdown that their son was making a sacrifice for science. In this he convinced himself the psychologist did not notice how the situation affects him, turning him into an executioner for the common good. Nevertheless, the intervention of one outside observer was enough to put an end to the experiment. Christina Maslick, a friend of Zimbardo's, on the 6th day could not stand it. What are you doing with these boys? The wording is very important. Christina perceived Zimbardo not as an authority, not shifting responsibility, and the CT participants as boys, that is, as people, not roles. This was sufficient, although Christine was also prepared to go to her superiors, i.e., to deal with the system if the situation could not be resolved on a personal level. Both elements are necessary. To see the participants in the situation as people, not functions. Have compassion for people, appeal to people. Calling yourself and those you talk to and about by name. Be prepared for the development of protest at the system level. The situation breaks down from below, at the personal level, and from above, at the level of system change and perceptions. Christina Maslick Zimbardo for over 40 years was the first example of banal heroism. Thanks to her, CT ended on an optimistic note. The situation can be turned around. The environment and the system can be fixed. The struggle always has meaning, even for the loner and the minority. A person can defy the situation. This is the banal heroism that Zimbardo devoted years after CT to studying and nurturing. In social psychology, a separate field of study of helping and altruism grew out of the observer problem. Chapter 5. The 10 Commandments of Banal Heroism. Although human actions are largely sometimes overwhelmingly determined by the situation, we are not slaves. It is important to understand the nature of the situation and learn how to counteract it. 10 steps will lead from banal evil to banal heroism. 1. Recognizing the mistake. Asking for forgiveness. Don't be ashamed of being wrong. Admitting a mistake eliminates the need to persist in a bad deed, to find excuses for it. 2. Merge with comrades. It interrupts the vicious cycle of evil. Asking for forgiveness turns you and the other person into a human being again. 2. Vigilance. Critical thinking. Check the arguments of your interlocutor. Do not take anything on faith. Do not enter a new situation without looking around. But even in a repetitive situation, inertia can fail. Check if something has changed. In familiar situations, check your habits. Teach this to your children. 3. Responsibility. The judgment of the future. Responsibility is full and personal, not collective. Never shift responsibility to superiors or other group members. Do not cover yourself with norms and accept it. Evaluate the situation from the future. You cannot justify yourself by following orders or other people's actions. 4. Individuality. Resist anonymity. Don't agree to fulfill a role, neither executioner nor victim. Take off your black glasses. State your name, profession. Explain your relationship to those present. Demand the same of others. Help others feel your individuality. Look for common ground. 5. Respect authority, without blind obedience. Listen to authority of all kinds, based on knowledge, age, status, reputation. But don't blindly obey anyone. Be vigilant. Obedience is often demanded by imposters. 6. Group selection, preserving self-respect. For the sake of getting into the inner circle, in the prestigious social group, people sacrifice sometimes and conscience and common sense. Balance the natural urge to merge with the equally natural desire to remain yourself. If a group breaks you, look for another, your group. 7. Picture and frame. Immune to propaganda. Bad deeds are clothed in beautiful words. Danger is obscured. Reality is manipulated. Learn to distinguish between picture and frame in propaganda, advertising, and conversation. 8. Perception of time. The eye is the past and the future. The hostage of the situation, deprived of individuality, loses his memory. He does not look into the future at what price he will have to pay. Remember who you think you are, who you were. Imagine how you will remember this situation in the future. Restore your individuality in time. 9. The illusion of security and the danger of manipulation. The need for security is the strongest instinct. A totalitarian system most often begins with hype about threats to the common good. calls to give up civil rights and freedoms for the sake of security. But remember, if you lose your freedom, you lose your security. 10. Resistance. If you can't protest alone, you can sound the alarm, call for help. Try to find like-minded people. Maybe they are just afraid. Even 3 will no longer be declared insane, and you will be able to make a difference. These rules are not only for the person caught in a particular private or public situation, but also for an outside observer. An observer is more likely to turn the situation around because he or she does not know its norms and does not have a role. It is only necessary to remain oneself, to remain vigilant, and not to be indifferent. Banal heroism has every chance to overcome banal evil. Resistance should not be passive. Resistance is not a thought, but a behavior. The disobedience of an individual or a heroic minority must become a system of resistance to evil. One of the main obstacles to heroism is the smallness of the individual, the unwillingness to go against all, the certainty of the complete futility of rebellion. Conclusion: the Lucifer Effect reveals the deep dependence of the individual on the situation and the system. A series of stupidities, cruelties, and atrocities committed not out of malice, but under the power of the situation, out of conformity, loyalty to one's group, a desire to fulfill one's role well, out of trust in authority, shyness, and even haste, pass before us. It is a strong warning to each of us, to society in general, to parents in particular. This book sounded a stern condemnation of American and not just American complacency. Zimbardo called the previous U.S. civilian and military administrations to account, recalling Vietnam and Iraq, and took part in the Abu Ghraib guards trial, where he again considered the bad guards to be a symptom of the overall sickness of the system, starting with the President and the Secretary of War. That said, the book repeatedly emphasizes understanding the situation is not an excuse. Yes, 90% of people usually agree to anything, up to and including participating in a firing squad. But 10% don't. Social situations are not elements, they are created by people, they consist of people, and people change them too. Dependence on the situation is great, but not absolute. Any person, since he is a human being, i.e., endowed with free will and creative thinking, can change the situation. To do this, it is only necessary not to take on faith other people's notions, not to consider any norms as justify. Any situation requires from a person a conscious challenge and risk. Thanks to the work of social psychologists, including Zimbardo himself, the world is now much more aware of the dangers of group behavior, the influence of the situation and the environment. The question has also risen as to whether it is possible to reverse the Stanford experiment, that is, to create a situation of good behavior. In 2012, on the HBR blog, Greg McHugh entitled his reflections thus. He posed this question to Zimbardo himself: if a bad system screws up a good person, will a good system fix a bad person? And could Milgram's shock experiment be reversed and acted upon with small rewards? It turns out that such experiments are already being done. For example, the Canadian Mounted Police began giving teenagers anti-fines for good behavior. Youth crime halved, and the recidivism rate dropped from 60% to 8%. Zimbardo himself, by that time, was developing his large-scale social project Heroic Imagination. The essence of the project is to use the great examples of the past 10 small examples of banal heroism to teach everyone to rise up, speak up, change the world. After all, you can hardly trust the system to change the system. Only a person can change the system. The modern world gives us new illusions of belonging the same virtual communities. New authorities. How convincing is sometimes a line from Wikipedia, but who wrote it? New confidence in one's own mind, in one's own rightness, in the fact that it is impossible for us. I will never do that. But to remain human is never self-made. It cannot be guaranteed to us from the outside. It is precisely heroism, albeit a banal one, or all the more trivial, not once and somewhere, but here and now. Thank you all for listening to the end. If you liked it, don't forget to rate and subscribe to the channel. You can buy the full version of the book at the link in the description.